If customers are just as satisfied, if not more, as we continue to automate and add technology, then okay, we're doing right by our customers. If we can save money, if we can increase lifetime value, or even, average sale, whatever some of those metrics are, then, that's a win all the way around.
Pros and cons.
Welcome to Pros and Cons, Engagement Unplugged. I'm Brian Rowley.
And I'm Laura Smith.
And today, Laura and I are tackling a big question, and that is, is your MarTech stack actually helping you deliver a better customer experience, or is it just getting in the way? We're going to talk of everything from the complexity and overinvestment to the constant chase for that next shiny tech trend. We're exploring how CX strategies can become more bloated than beneficial. And our actual guest today shares where brands actually go wrong with over-engineered customer experiences and how to cut through the noise to get back to what really matters, delivering real value to your customers. So I say we jump into it.
Yeah, but before we dive in with our guest, we're going to talk about our marketer's remorse. So we've all had those experiences, whether it be technology, whether it be campaigns, something that seemed like a good idea at the moment, but then really didn't land. So we all have those moments. So Brian and we could talk about ours quickly. So Brian, is there a moment in time over your career where you made a decision, whether that be technology choice, that really in the end it didn't work for you?
I would say, first of all, I think our producer Joey will appreciate this because during our COVID time, we actually tried this to create sort of a corporate video remotely. And it involved sending green screens to all of our executives for them to film behind and doing all these different things. And I would say, although our efforts were good, it was a bit disastrous.
Go big or go home, buddy.
Go big or go home was our motto for sure. But I think those were some of the things. I think we all sort of get into these moments, but that was one of them. I think another one probably for me would be just actually some of the tools that we've used, right? I mean, you come into, you go into some of these pitches and you're like, oh, this can make you more efficient. It can do all these things. And we use one tool, and I'm not going to name the tool because I don't want to do that. But it was about sort of organizing the team and pulling them all together and having visibility across your agencies and your internal teams and all of this stuff. And it actually just was a complete disaster because no one ever used it. When they did, they complained about it. So, those are just a couple of examples, I guess. I don't know. How about yourself?
Yeah, I'm not going to take the tech route. I'm going to talk about a campaign that earlier on in my career, I worked in an advertising agency, and it was a commercial insurance piece of business. And the overarching brand campaign was strong, but we worked on a specific business line, which was very focused on commercial insurance. And the business was just afraid to take risks, to have fun. And it really was, an arduous process to create a 60-second spot that in the end, really, it's 17 to 20 lines of copy. So we had to go through so many rounds of legal edits, business edits. It got so watered down. The client wouldn't let any of the creativity come through. So we basically landed on a very boring spot, commercial ad. And it probably ran a few times and they pulled it because it didn't work, quote unquote.
Yeah.
But really in the end, it's well, you didn't give enough time to see if it worked, but it really didn't work because it was not, the creativity couldn't come through. So it's not one I would ever brag about. It's one that I would say, okay, that was an experience, because even though pushing back, and sometimes we can't win those battles, it just proves that, you have to let the creativity play its way through. And sometimes the brand or the internal folks just don't always, have the right decision making. So that was mine. So not tech related, but definitely one that I remember my career from a campaign perspective.
Yeah, and I think it actually ties back to you, and it doesn't really, whether it's tech or whether it's campaign related or whatever. Sometimes the overthinking of things, right, are things that actually get us into trouble, which is actually a great segue into the introduction of our guest today, right? So today we've got a great guest who has actually helped many and some of the world's biggest brands make smarter decisions about their marketing tech and avoid the ones that sort of waste time and money. He's also the voice behind a couple of top marketing podcasts out there where he's led hundreds of conversations with CX and marketing leaders. He's built companies, written books, and created courses to help marketers keep up with all that constant change that we constantly deal with every day. So here to help us explore when more tech leads to less impact and how we refocus on what really matters in CX. Guys, please welcome Greg Kihlström. Greg, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much. Looking forward to talking with you.
Yeah, we're excited to have you.
Yes, we are, Greg. So we're going to dive in and let's start with the trap itself. Where do you see customer experience technology doing more harm than good right now?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. One is there's a tendency to overbuy. So, you have redundant platforms where someone used platform X for this thing in their last position, let's just say, and so they know it for that and they buy it, and then sure enough, the company already has this other platform that actually does what that other platform does, and so now all of a sudden you have at best it's just redundancy and some waste, but at worst there's actually conflict and features that are basically in conflict with one another, and any kind of financial waste, everybody's looking for greater efficiencies and things like that. I think the other part is just having a lot of tech can distract us from focusing on the customer. And I spend a lot of my time trying to automate things and about, how data can help and all of those. And yet when you spend all your time on that and not thinking about, okay, well, what is this actually doing, not only for customers, but also the employees using those platforms, you can miss a big step in that. And so I always think that people go into buying a platform because they kind of have this idea that the platform is going to solve all the problems, and it ends up being the people in the process that really can make or break it.
How do you help somebody out of those situations? So if they do, because I know you do a lot of consulting work, right? So if they do have these two redundant processes or systems, how do you help them navigate that to figure out, is there one or both of these not effective with this new team or structure? Like how do you solve for that?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to really get an understanding of what are people doing with their days. So, and you start finding out that this team all the way over. I mean, most of the companies that I work with are, they're enterprise companies. So lots of teams, silos, all the stereotypical things that you think of when you think of enterprise companies. So, you do have sometimes redundancy and things, but to really just understand, okay, well, why are people using these tools? What is it in their day that is causing them to use this or need this or think they need this thing? And then, these other people over here, they're probably using a completely different tool, sometimes to the same end. So I just start with a map of not of even of the platforms, but of the processes that people go through. And then you could take it to, okay, now what are all the platforms that we have and connections and all that kind of stuff.
I think it's also an example of sort of how, companies are really siloed in some of their decision making, because, I mean, we see this all the time. Even, we're somewhat of a smaller company, but you actually, Laura, we see it, right? Where you've got, one group is using one tool and another one is using something completely different, but they both do the same thing. And it's like we would be so much more powerful if we all just were either on the same platform or we all had a way to sort of, at least have the conversations around, hey, we're making some of these investments. I don't know, Greg, like you said, you work with Fortune 5, the big enterprise companies, right? So do you see a trend there? Like, do companies that fall into this trap, are they more of the larger companies? Do you see it in smaller companies? Like, is it a combination of both? Because it seems like it's kind of obvious, and yet we still see it happening all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I see it even though I work mainly with larger companies, I deal plenty with smaller organizations as well. So I see it's everywhere. I'm always kind of shocked where if someone just really, really likes a platform, they get to use it and it breaks everything. So I'll pick on Slack right now. It's like, I think Slack's an amazing tool and it can do some great things. But if you already have 3 other applications that allow you to chat in real time, like, it doesn't really matter that there's a bunch of people at your company that really, really like this one thing. Now, all of a sudden, you have the cognitive load of, okay, I need to send a message to someone. What platform do they like to use? What do they check most frequently? What's the best tool for this kind of communication? It's just, I feel like it's an unnecessary burden on even though it's intended to give employees choice and make it easier. Like, it's an unnecessary burden to give people like you already have to check email and your phone and everything else. It's like now all of a sudden, again, just to pick on that one example, but I think it's one that tends to come up. It's just like, why not just give people less choice, make it easier to decide, even if it's not their platform that they might have chosen anyway.
Yeah, and I think, we definitely see that internally too as well, like that the preference piece, and different departments prefer different tools, but really I think the goal is to minimize that. But the other side of it too is like you can have one platform, like say a CRM, for instance, and you have different people using it in different ways or different levels, right? So some teams are using it they're full on embedded in it. Other teams are kind of using it. And so then it doesn't really maximize that tool to the greatest it can be utilized and benefit the business. So I think that's another thing. Even if there's one tool, there can be inconsistencies there which don't really get the true benefits out of that tool.
Yeah, and I think that's where leaders really need to step up here. And, again, whether they like the tool or not, again, we have such, I know there are software tools that I love and some that I don't love, but regardless of personal subjective preferences, it's like, if you're a leader, you gotta be on the same page as your peers. And if X CRM is the thing that you've chosen and you're going to use, then use it, and then build your processes around it. Empathize with the people using it, empathize with the customers always, but you got to lean into the thing that, in some cases, millions of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, are being poured into to run the business.
Right. But you just made a great point, though, because what we forget about sometimes is the customer and the customer experience, right? So can you share an example of where brands over-optimize or over-automate and they're losing sight of the customer experience?
Yeah, I do think it's a similar enough thing of like, oh, wow, I read this thing, or this platform came out with this new feature, let's use it, and I assume it's always with best intentions of like, okay, well, if we could just personalize a little bit more, if we could just automate a little bit more, then the customers must be happier with it. And I'm a huge proponent of all the buzz, the one-to-one omni-channel personalization. Like, I love it. I believe in it, but you've got to get so many other things right before you start engineering something like that, because often, in my experience as a customer, that stuff is great when it works, but do the basic. Like, when I show up to the hotel registration desk or whatever, like, know who I am, know that I've stayed at the hotel before you start text messaging me this or that, or, hyper personalization. It's just like, again, make sure I have a nice stay in the hotel, and then I appreciate that stuff when it happens and when it's done well. But when that stuff's done well, but my actual experience is, mediocre, I don't really think about how hyper personalized the digital part of that experience is. I think about how mediocre the physical experience was.
I think, though, if, so many times in these conversations, and when you talk about marketing, either tactics or tools or whatever the case may be, I think if we just stop for a second and pause and just say, how is this helping the customer? I think so much of what we do, we would realize we're doing more to satisfy ourselves than we are to actually satisfy a customer experience. And to your point, I don't think that, you have a ton of tools, and that's always going to make the customer experience better, right? So, if someone knows who you are when they're calling, but they're still nasty when they pick up the phone, it doesn't really matter, right? Like, great that you knew who I was, but, could you tune it up a little bit on your attitude, right, as we move forward? So one of the questions I have is, when marketing teams sort of spot some of this over investing in tools and all of that, like, How do they overcome that? Like, what are ways for them to be able to spot that and realize, hey, wait a second, this isn't really helping? Like, do you have any guidance that you can be to sort of those red flags that people should be paying attention to?
Yeah, I mean, I think from a metrics perspective, you can start seeing diminishing returns on ROI. If your measurement is sophisticated enough, you should be able to see, okay, well, we turned this thing on and yeah, it made an impact, but it was negligible, and it probably wasn't any better than if we just would have, tried to write better copy or something like that. And so, I think for those that are able to measure pretty well, that's a good way to do it. I would also just fall back on, like, are your fundamentals as marketers successful already? Like, are they so successful that the only thing that could improve them is just hyper automation or personalization or things? I mean, the other thing that maybe a counterpoint to myself even, but that I would say is if it's a zero sum, like if you're going to get the same results and you can automate, then by all means, like you're probably saving personnel costs or something like that. So it's not that you should never do that. It's just think about the incremental gains that you're going to have. And if they're so small for the cost, there's not really ROI in doing that. And again, if there's major parts of just fun, like the marketing 101 stuff that aren't performing, like look there first, because that's probably going to be, if we're talking about incremental gains, like that's going to be the biggest increment that you could do versus something, kind of downstream and small gain.
Yeah, I think we all fall, Laura, I know you and I, right? We have this conversation all the time, right? We're so metric focused, right? In terms of everything that we do. And that's not a bad thing. I don't think that that's actually a bad thing. I think, but it is trying to develop, and I'll throw this one to you, Greg. Like, what does a healthy relationship with CX technology look like? What is that? Like, how do you balance whether a company is healthy in that approach or not?
It kind of goes back to what you're saying earlier, which is, is the technology helping the customer, or is it just helping the company keep track of things a little bit better? This is where you can measure things using, I don't think that Net Promoter Score solves all problems, but I think it could help solve things here. Like, okay, well, we're steady, or we're increasing our score or whatever, even as we introduce more automation. Okay, I think we're doing the right thing. If customer satisfaction drops, but we save a few bucks, I don't think that's a win. I think that's a long term, I think that's sabotage, but short term, maybe you save some dollars, but that's not a recipe for long term or even medium term success.
Well, I think when we talked before, Greg, you had said, get the customer experience right or in a good place, and then add your technology onto that, right? Because it's not, if that's fundamentally not working, technology is not going to do all the work there. So, and we kind of, alluded to that earlier in the conversation, but I think it is about focus on the customer experience at all touch points across the organization, and then start layering in the technology, right? And I think and not doing all at the same time, because that would obviously cause a lot of, frustration and poor experiences. But that seems to be the better approach, by just kind of optimizing those experiences and maybe finding those ways and those places where technology can help further optimize it, but not feel like you have to just take it all on. Is that fair?
Yeah, and I think a good way to do that is to start looking at the micro moments, the micro, even internally, you could call them transactions, even if there's no financial component to it, is just like, what are all of the Lego bricks that go into building an experience? And you know what? I bet 30% of those could actually be automated with no one caring one way or the other, like probably no net gain or loss, but efficiency saving. So cool, do that. But like start thinking in terms of those little things that could make ideally a big difference to the customer. But at the very least, when you start thinking granularly like that, then you can start making things a little more streamlined, one piece at a time. And that's not a big answer and a big cost savings and a big NPS gain or, whatever it is. But over time, if you teach people to think like that, you're going to keep winning, because you're going to keep saving money. You're going to keep having better customer experiences. And you're also not going to like change the customer experience all of a sudden one day versus another, because nobody loves change either, even if it's slightly better change.
Right. I mean, speaking of change, AI, obviously the buzzword right now everywhere, but what's your take on AI's role in the stack decision making? Like, where do you see that going and how? I mean, it's obviously implemented now in some forms and fashions, but what's your take on the future of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the future is really augmenting, and I would even say elevating the role of the professional, and I think if we can think in terms of that, then there are going to be people that lose their job. Any time throughout history that there's been technology improvements or whatever, there's been job losses, but then there's actually been more jobs created and more wealth created. So we, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, are sitting at this point in time where there's going to be some change. But I think at the end of the day, the role of, whether it's CX professionals, whether it's others, that it is going to be elevated to do something more strategic, more just valuable, and that feels more valuable versus being stuck in front of spreadsheets or, doing data entry or doing repeatable tasks and everything. And I think that's what AI is there to do, is, to help us automate things, be more efficient, as well as gain quicker access to insights that we can then do something with, and I think that's the value that we bring to the table.
I think the important part of that, though, and Laura, you touched on it, and I know we've talked about it, as you mentioned, Laura, like getting back to the basics. I think when it comes to automation or even AI, it's a really difficult balance to be able to try to create, because I can tell you that, and I think one of the recommendations I would say to people is walk yourself through your own customer experience and be honest with it as to whether or not it's effective or not. Because there's only so many times you can push me through automation before I actually may want to have a conversation with someone. And if that option isn't there, it's actually going to be really bad customer experience for me. Whereas you or Laura, you may have either a greater tolerance or a lesser tolerance for it. I think AI is a similar thing. Like, you have to balance how much you know about someone before they start to feel like you're being intrusive in their lives and some of their behaviors. And so I do think it is a balance, and I do think it's tricky. I don't know that all the answers are there, but I do think it does get back to, like, some of it is very basic and some of it is just making sure you understand what that experience is and you feel comfortable with it before you hand it off to someone else. I mean, I don't know if you have an opinion on that, but that's my take on it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel totally agree. Like, the process of journey mapping, I think some people roll their eyes when they hear that. Some people, like myself, I've never been through that process and not learned something valuable from it. Even if I did it for the same organization, like 12 months after I did it the first time, like I've always found value in doing that. It takes time in some cases, but I was working with a healthcare company and found out that by literally going through the process, there is a scenario where you get like 4 text messages at the same time after creating this one type of appointment. And wow, what a terrible experience. And nobody knew is the thing. It's like, everyone was doing their job and they were doing, best intentions. Like, we want to make sure that they get this information or whatever. Mapping that out, it got solved, and it got solved quickly in an organization that doesn't necessarily move quickly. So, by going through that process, and I would even say going through it internally as well, because I think that can be as important to just understand, okay, well, I mean, I've been a leader several times in my career. I've always felt like I need to know what the people I need to know the role that someone's trying to play in order to manage them as best as I can. It's not that you can't manage people without doing that, but I always felt that is important. And I take that when I consult now as, I need to know what these people are doing. And, from my perspective, it seems like, oh, they're wasting a bunch of time because they should be doing X, Y, and Z. But I don't know, 9 times out of 10, whether it's a good reason or not, there's a reason why they're doing that, and you got to talk to them and understand about doing it. So, maybe the theme there is empathy, right? To walk in the shoes and really just understand, even if it can be improved. I think just going through the process helps.
Yeah, I know somebody back in their earlier on in their career, they worked for a fast food company and in corporate, and they were required 2 to 3 times a year to go into those environments and work behind the counter. And I think that is the best example of showing how I think that you're 100%. That's empathy, Greg, because people are having to flip burgers or make fries or do whatever. But it's also seeing everything that's happening and what they're encountering. It only makes you better at your job and then helps equip them to do a better job. So I think I 100% am aligned there. And I think it's great that companies like that do force that behavior. It makes sense.
I always equate that back to like waiting tables. I think anybody that's in a service role, a customer service role or support role, if you've never waited a table, you have no idea what the customer's like. I think waiting tables is probably one of the best things to be able to get you to be comfortable with how to handle customer situations.
I did it once and I hated it.
I can't say I have, but yeah, I know what you mean. And I mean, there's I know like USAA and some other Zappos and others, like they will put like first couple weeks on the job, they will put you in customer service. So, the equivalent of waiting tables in that scenario. And it's like, yeah, and you see, these companies being, they have very satisfied and very loyal customers because everybody in the company knows that job and knows at least some window into what customers are actually needing and wanting.
Right. One question, going back to AI for a second. How are you using AI right now? Or how would you feel like, what are you finding the most effective use of AI in your role? And potentially even, when you have various roles, I know, and then how are you recommending it to some of your, customers and clients? If there was one that you would say this is the most effective use of it that you're experiencing.
Yeah, in a couple, I guess I play a few different roles. So in doing the podcasts and producing those and everything, it is I run a lean team. I have a team. It's a few of us that are doing things. Highly automated process. In fact, I dedicate like an afternoon every month to literally sitting and thinking, okay, what did I do last month that I don't ever want to do again? So like from that perspective, and that just kind of goes with maybe the media production and all that, margins being what they are and time being what it is, finite. It's all about optimization and stuff like that. I think, when I'm consulting with a Fortune 500 company, efficiency is certainly important, but it's also about some of those other things like reaching the customer at the right time and the right place. And so a lot of what I try to focus on is how do we get quicker insights. In some cases, it's how do we get quicker insights to a marketing team so they can make better decisions in a group. It's becoming more and more, how do I get quicker insights so I can create a feedback loop to then feed some, predictive model that then automates and personalizes. And, even some of the larger companies that I work with, they're still somewhere on they're not all the way on the advanced side of the spectrum, so to speak, of being able to do all of the fancy things, but it is quicker speed to insights and automating away some of the minutia and some of the repeatable stuff that is taking them away from making better decisions at the very least.
I think we've learned from that too. I think one of the things that we have seen in the way that we use it is, it is very powerful in getting you to a starting point, not necessarily the end point. And I think we've seen that success with that. I also think that, giving you some, to your point, like when we're looking at podcasts and things that we do, understanding and getting some fast insights on what's happening in the market. What are some of the topics that are really important to people? Because, it's all about relevance, right? There's empathy on that side of it. It's being relevant as well in the conversations that you're having and making sure that it's what people want to hear. So I think it's been helpful for us there too. I don't think we've even scratched the surface of what it's capable of doing. But I can tell you what we have seen so far are is really, I mean, it really just helps you get to that starting point a heck of a lot faster than you could do without it.
Yeah, I mean, with podcasting, it's like if I can focus my energy on how do I create the best content, which, I mean, to date, at least, AI is not as good at being a podcast host as humans. So, if I can focus my energy on how do I get to that point, then, scheduling and, generating social posts and, some of the other things that, I don't put anything out there that's not double checked by a human, to some degree, but if the product is the podcast, like the questions and my interactions with the guests and things like that is the prime thing that needs to be focused on. And then, then the rest, let's take a look at where we can automate and not lose something and stuff like that.
Yeah, agreed.
Great. Well, now we're going to move into our hot seat segment.
Step up, step in, you're in the hot seat now. Hot seat, come on and play.
Okay, no pressure, Greg, but we're going to ask you for one hot take. Okay, so if you could wipe one popular CX or MarTech trend off the map entirely forever, what would it be?
Wow.
Don't say podcast.
right now, huh? I mean, I think looking at a single metric for success would be, I think, is just a setup for failure. And, I'm not going to point fingers. Any company that does that has their thing of, it could be CSAT, NPS, whatever the case may be. But just looking at the single thing as a barometer, I think we need to stop that.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I will say we're running out of time. One last comment would just be that as you reflect on this past month, I hope Laura and I don't fall into that list of things that I wish I hadn't done during the course of the month. I know we've really enjoyed having you here, so thank you very much for that. Don't tell us if we did fall on that list.
No, you're great. You're great.
Thank you, Greg. We really appreciate you spending time with us today. And we know hopefully we'll talk again. I know that, Brian's been on your podcast before and now you're coming to our podcast. So we're excited to hopefully keep the relationship and the conversations going.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, interesting, Laura, right? I mean, we continue to go back to some of the things. We talk about empathy, right? We've talked about that on several of the podcasts before, different contexts, but still the same. I think the point of, and you and I have been through many customer journey maps, right? And looking at that. But I do think it's an important part to figure out and understand what that is and how automations actually play into that and work through it in order for it to make for that customer experience.
Yeah, I think the customer experience piece, the fundamentals of that's what needs to stand out.
Mm-hmm.
I think that like we talked about, that technology can come after as long as we get the basics right. And that to me was what I take away from this is, and try to think of that day to day, because there are situations where we maybe not be optimizing our customer experience, but we're using great technology. But how do we know that's all working together for effective outputs and outcomes? So yeah, it was a great conversation.
Yeah, I would agree. For those of you listening, thank you so much. And most importantly, if you like what you heard today, be sure to follow us. If you want to hear more from Greg, you can find him on LinkedIn and check out his podcast, The Agile Brand and B2B Agility with Greg Kihlström.